If you would like to skip ahead to the levels, level 0 is at 40 seconds, level 1 at 2:58, level 2 at 3:55, and level 3 at 5:04. I'm going to go through each level of the number knowledge test, so it might be a good idea to have the materials from the administration packet printed and in front of you to follow along with, and you can add any notes if necessary. As a reminder, it is recommended that you begin at least 2 years below the student's age, so they experience success from the start. If you are working with middle school or high school students, level 2 is recommended as your starting point. The preliminary level is simply asking students to count from 1 to 10. If they cannot yet do that, this test should be discontinued. For level 0, you will need 2 different colored counters, at least 8 of each. Even though the test is telling you to use blue and white counters, you can use whatever color you have on hand. Just be sure to coordinate the colors you are using to the questions on the test so you ask the students using the correct colors. For the first few questions, you are showing students a row of counters and stacks of counters. These are the different versions the test is looking for when presenting the manipulatives. Make sure the counters you use can be stacked, as the test calls for that in the comparative questions. It is also important to keep in mind the thickness of the counters you use when stacking, because it will be easier for students to see comparative values when using block structures versus the flat discs. Question 3, part A and B, will be set up the same way with stacks. This time, though, you are asking for less. Make sure to use the prompting statement so they have a cue to change their thinking pattern. Reminder, question 2 and 3 both have a part A and B. Students must answer both parts correctly to get a point. The 2-part questions are used to reduce the likelihood that students are receiving points for answers that were guessed. Question 4 asks for counters in a specific pattern. Again, you do not have to have the exact colors. Here you can see the pattern using blue and green. I would ask the question as it relates to the green counters, since the green is substituted for the white. The final question, you'll use 2 different colored counters again, one color having 7 and another having 8 for a total of 15 counters. The directions tell you to have a mixed array and that they don't want them in a row. Here's an example of that. You'll be asking the student to count the color that shows 8, so in this case it would be the purple counters. Once the student has completed this level, you can total the correct responses. Remember, he or she must have both parts of the 2-part questions correct for the point. No partial credit is given. If there are 3 or more correct, move on to the next level. If not, the test should be discontinued. Level 1 will no longer require the counters. However, you will need your first visual arrays. The transition to level 1 may be hard for some students if they rely on seeing that quantity with manipulatives. When asking these first few questions, be cognizant of the speed at which you read the question, as the student may be generating a mental picture of quantity to rely on. The next section of questions will utilize a few of the visual arrays. The final question will call for you to use the visual array showing the 4 numerals in a box. The action is written below the first question, but you should show the array and ask the child to say each of the numerals before asking the question. When you have completed this level, the student must have 5 of the 9 questions correct to move on to level 2. If not, discontinue the assessment. If testing older students, level 2 is where it is recommended you begin. The questions may seem elementary to them, but you have the potential to gather some great data on mental math strategies if you probe for it. This level requires some of the visual arrays that were in the administration packet, so be sure they are prepped and in the correct order before testing. Read the questions and statements as they are scripted and be cognizant of the speed at which you are reading them. In questions 6 and 7, 2 answers are acceptable as correct, since the answer is based on the mental image and the way the student perceives the question. The final 2 questions will use the visual arrays, where the 2 numbers are shown, but printed horizontally, so the student must rely on mentally putting them one over the other if they are going to use the standard algorithm. If students have 5 of the 9 answers correct, you can proceed to the last level of testing. As a reminder, any questions with part A and B, both A and B must be correct in order to award the point. There is no partial credit given. The final level of the test is designed much like the previous level, but the quantities are larger for students to work with mentally. These questions can offer you some great data as far as student strategies go, so be sure to clarify the thinking or strategies that are happening with the students. Questions 3 and 4 require students to hold more information in their head than they previously had to, so it is again reminded to you to be cognizant of the speed at which you are reading the questions, and if needed, repeat the questions. You will again need 2 of the visual arrays for questions 5 and 6 at this level. When you complete the test, total all correct answers to calculate the raw score. Reminder, if students came in at a level 2 or 3, be sure to award them all points for the lower levels. I highly suggest practicing the administration of this test prior to using it with students. So whether it's you sitting down by yourself and practicing laying out the manipulatives or the visual aids, or even better, if you have a family member or a colleague that's willing to sit down with you and run through it, it would be beneficial. If you have questions, please email info@altshift.education.